On a wet March night in 1943, a strip of Morse paper slid into a tray marked Routine. Most of Bletchley Park would have seen nothing in it, just weather groups, fuel figures, a few clipped German phrases punched out by exhausted radio operators somewhere in the Atlantic. Dr. Beatrice Vale saw one verb standing in the wrong place. Not a code word, not a hidden name, not a map reference, a verb. And once she saw it, she could not unsee it. The same crooked sentence appeared again 2 nights later, then again after that, not always from the same transmitter, not always at the same hour, but always with the same small mistake. In standard Kriegsmarine message German, the auxiliary should have dropped neatly to the end of the clause. These men kept dragging it forward. Just 2 positions. 2 positions was enough. Beatrice Vale was 34 years old, a former lecturer in medieval German dialects, pulled from a university life of manuscripts and footnotes into Britain's most secret intelligence war. Her desk at Bletchley was not glamorous. It sat under a yellow bulb in a room that smelled of damp wool, cold tea, carbon paper, and machine oil. Around her, the war made noise. Bombs thudded in nearby huts. Teleprinters chattered. Message tubes snapped open. Young women in uniform carried trays of Enigma decrypts as if they were carrying live explosives. But the messages in front of Beatrice had not come from the glamorous pile. They came from the reject basket. Low-priority naval chatter. Fragments caught by WWII service operators on the British coast. Too short for clean cryptanalysis. Too ordinary for urgency. Too broken to interest the men chasing daily Enigma keys. And that was why they had survived untouched. By the spring of 1943, Britain was being strangled at sea. Before the war, the island had imported roughly 55 million tons of material a year. By early 1943, that flow had been cut brutally down. Food, oil, steel, rubber, aircraft parts, explosives, medicine, every lifeline had to cross water patrolled by German submarines. The U-boats did not need to conquer Britain. They only had to make the Atlantic too expensive to cross. Wolf packs spread across the convoy routes in loose hunting lines. One boat spotted smoke on the horizon, sent a brief signal, and the others converged. The Germans kept their transmissions short, sometimes under 90 seconds, because every second on the air made a submarine easier to locate. That was the terrible discipline of the system. Speak quickly, vanish, kill later. Bletchley Park could sometimes read the naval Enigma traffic quickly enough to help the Admiralty steer convoys around danger. But there were blackout periods. Settings changed. Cribs failed. Weather ruined reception. A convoy might sail through a dead zone before anyone in England knew the trap was there. And in those hours, men died inside steel holes and burning water. Beatrice's odd little grammar error should have remained meaningless, except it appeared across 8 messages in 12 days, then across 11, then across 15. She pinned them to a corkboard and began marking them with red thread. The pattern was not content, it was habit, a clipped conditional particle, an old-fashioned genitive ending in a naval phrase, a spelling of a weather abbreviation that had not been taught widely after the late 1930s, and always that displaced auxiliary verb. To a codebreaker, it looked like bad German. To Beatrice, it looked like schooling. Not birthplace, schooling. Someone had been taught German radio style by the same instructor in the same institutional culture during the same narrow window. More than one operator shared the mistake, which meant the transmitters were not random boats crossing the same water. They were a small circle. A circle inside the wolf pack. On March 18th, Beatrice carried 9 pages of notes to a senior naval intelligence officer who did not have time for philology. He listened for 3 minutes. Then he told her, gently, that grammar did not sink ships. She laid the messages on his desk in chronological order. One from the night before convoy HX-229 was sighted. One from the morning a tanker column altered course. One from a frequency that had never been flagged because its messages were too short. Then she showed him the map. The little mistakes were not scattered. They formed a moving arc across the North Atlantic, ahead of the convoy lanes, just far enough apart to look unrelated if the reader cared only about cipher traffic. Beatrice did not claim she had broken a code. That would have been easier to dismiss. She claimed something more unsettling. A handful of U-boat officers were passing positional hints outside the normal Enigma channel, using a secondary hand cipher wrapped inside routine naval language. The cipher still hid the coordinates, but the language around it revealed the people using it. The Admiralty could not yet read the secret, but it could begin to follow the hands that carried it. By the next morning, the low-priority intercepts were no longer low priority. Scarborough and Colorcoats were told to listen harder in the narrow windows Beatrice had identified. Operators were instructed to preserve even incomplete fragments. Nothing was to be discarded because it looked routine. Beatrice was given 3 assistants, none of them traditional cryptographers. Tom Reed, a nervous schoolmaster from Bristol who could identify regional German prose habits faster than most people could read a menu. Helen Sayer, a 26-year-old Oxford graduate with a gift for punctuation and no patience for officers who called language soft evidence. And Nora Finch, who had spent 6 months indexing captured naval training manuals and remembered page layouts the way other people remembered faces. Together, they built what they called the hand list. Not a list of names, not yet. A list of habits. Operator Amber used clauses that ran too long, as if he were translating thought into radio form too slowly. Operator Slate avoided subordinate clauses almost completely, as if he had realized something in his own writing was dangerous. Operator Bell favored an archaic nautical genitive that looked formal on paper and absurd in a 90-second transmission. Operator Wren repeatedly shortened one weather particle in a way that matched a Baltic training manual printed before the war. None of it was proof alone. Together, it became a fingerprint. A man can change his cipher. He has a harder time changing the room where he learned to write. By early April, Nora found the first anchor. A captured administrative appendix from the German Naval School at Mirvik listed a signal instruction course from the winters of 1936 and 1937. Its sample transmissions used the same old genitive construction, the same weather shortening, the same strange placement pattern in a model subordinate clause that should never have been printed that way. It was not a dialect in the simple sense. It was a training scar. A mistake copied from teacher to pupil, then carried to sea inside the hands of men who believed their encryption made them invisible. That discovery narrowed the field from dozens of U-boats to a small clutch of officers trained in the same stream, assigned to Atlantic patrols and known to operate within the same wolf pack groups. The list was still too large. Then Operator Slate made his mistake. Slate had been the careful one. His messages were shorter than the others. He chopped sentences into hard little pieces. He avoided the very grammatical structure that had first caught Beatrice's attention. For 2 weeks, he almost disappeared into the traffic. But on April 21st, in a rough weather transmission picked up in fragments, Slate sent a line that broke his own discipline. Only 6 words of usable German survived. 6 words. And 1 misplaced verb. Helen circled it so hard her pencil tore the paper. The Admiralty cross-checked the time window against known U-boat patrol boxes. 3 possible boats remained. 1 had reported engine trouble. 1 was too far south unless its last known position was false. The 3rd was moving exactly where the secondary traffic suggested the hidden group had begun to gather. No one in the room cheered. They had not found treasure. They had found a shadow with a hull. For the next 10 days, the shadow held. The boat's official Enigma reports showed nothing unusual. That was the frightening part. If British routing officers had relied only on the main cipher picture, they would have judged a stretch of ocean dangerous but manageable. Beatrice's hand list said otherwise. Amber, Bell, Wren, and Slate were not merely reporting to command. They were talking around command. A private shorthand had grown among officers who had trained together and trusted one another's habits more than the official net. It was not a grand German master plan. It was almost worse. It was informal, human, convenient. The kind of thing disciplined men do when they think the enemy cannot hear the shape of their voices. In late April, the Admiralty rerouted a convoy by a margin that looked excessive to several commanders at sea. The detour burned fuel they did not want to waste. It widened the crossing. It forced escorts to stretch their protection over ugly weather. But it pulled the convoy away from a patch of ocean where the hand list had gone suddenly warm. 2 nights later, long-range aircraft reported U-boat activity in the water the convoy had avoided. Not near it, inside it. That was the moment the room changed. Beatrice Vale was not treated as a curiosity after that. Her scraps of syntax were pinned beside convoy plots. Her operators were given colors on Admiralty maps. Her team began working with traffic analysts who measured signal bearings and transmission timing, while the linguists measured hesitation, compression, old schooling, and unconscious style. The war at sea had always been a war of machines. Now it was also a war of habits. A man under pressure reaches for the form he learned first. A tired radio operator cuts corners in the dialect of his training. An officer who believes he is sending numbers safely may still reveal himself in the grammar wrapped around them. And once Bletchley understood that, every routine fragment became dangerous. Between May and July of 1943, several Atlantic convoys were steered away from concentrations that the ordinary intelligence picture had not fully explained. The decision did not belong to one woman alone. Radar mattered. Escort carriers mattered. Very long-range aircraft mattered. Improved direction finding mattered. The breaking of naval Enigma mattered enormously. But in the thin space between what the cipher revealed and what the ocean still concealed, Beatrice's hand list gave the Admiralty something it desperately needed. Warning, not certainty. Not magic. Warning. Enough to bend a convoy track before the trap closed. Enough to make a U-boat group wait in the wrong water. Enough to turn a private German shortcut into a British advantage. And sometimes in the Atlantic, enough was the difference between a ship arriving and a ship becoming a flame on the horizon. May 1943 became the month the U-boat arm broke its rhythm. German losses rose at a rate the Kriegsmarine could not absorb. Admiral Karl Dönitz would pull much of the force back from the North Atlantic, while the Allies pushed more ships, more aircraft, more radar, and more intelligence into the fight. Historians would later describe the turning point with the names of technologies and commanders. That is how wars are usually remembered. By machines, by admirals, by tonnage, by maps with arrows. Beatrice Vale's work, like so much of Bletchley, went into locked files. Her name did not appear in public accounts. The technique was absorbed after the war under Blandin language, operator fingerprinting, traffic analysis, stylometric habit recognition, a phrase clean enough to hide the human fact inside it. The human fact was this: a woman trained to hear the past tense in dead languages listened to living men trying to hide inside radio noise, and she heard where their schoolrooms still lived in them. Years after the war, one of her former assistants wrote that Beatrice kept a small envelope in her desk. Inside it was a strip of intercepted Morse paper, faded almost white, with 3 red pencil marks under a German subordinate clause. No medal. No photograph of a convoy. No official citation. Just the mistake. The tiny wrongness that opened a door. The boat believed to have carried Operator Slate never returned from its summer patrol. Somewhere west of Ireland, under cold, black water, the man who had tried so carefully to erase his own style disappeared with his crew. He never knew that he had been found. Not by a searchlight, not by radar, not by a decrypted order, by a verb that arrived 2 places too early. And in a war where nations built machines to hide meaning, that was the part no machine could fully protect. The cipher concealed the message. The grammar betrayed the man.